Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lincoln Park Zoo's podcast, That Tracks. I'm Jillian Rader, and today with me I have...
My name is Seth Magley. I'm the Senior Director of the Urban Wildlife Institute at Lincoln Park Zoo.
And today you're hosting us in your office. Thank you so much.
Welcome to the Conservation and Science Annex. It's kind of a secluded little spot, but it's perfect for us to do our work.
I love it. It's a different kind of urban wildlife.
That's right. Yeah, I suppose we are the urban wildlife that inhabit this particular space.
I love it. Okay, speaking of urban wildlife, you have a very interesting job. Can you explain what an urban wildlife ecologist is and what you do here?
Yeah, when I started at the zoo 16 years ago, it was fun because I got to figure that out. They hired me as an urban wildlife ecologist, and then I said, what do I do? And they said, we thought you were going to tell us. I do a lot of different things on a day-to-day basis. I manage an amazing team of scientists. So I spend some of my time doing all the things a middle manager does, all of the salary requests and HR stuff. But I'm fortunate in that I get to spend some time in the field, setting up some of the equipment that we use to study wildlife. I spend a lot of time writing grants, writing research papers. We really function similarly to how scientists would at a university or a big government agency, except that we have all the amazing benefits of being part of the zoo.
Awesome. And you started talking about the creation of the Urban Wildlife Institute. What has that looked like the last almost 15 years now? 15 years, something like that?
Yeah, when I look back, I'm just amazed by the growth that we've had. When we started about 15 years ago, we were really focused very locally. We did a lot of work at Nature Boardwalk, which we still do, because it was just opening at that time as the nature space that it is. Then we were able to expand our scope to think about Chicago, and really not just the city of Chicago, but the metropolitan area. We work across 4 counties, and we collect data on many, many different species at over 100 field sites. We've been doing that for over a decade now. And then in the last 6 or 7 years, we made our third big transition where we started to really think globally. And we work with our partners across the Urban Wildlife Information Network in 60 plus cities around the world to study wildlife at that scale. So it's amazing to me to think that we started from this one pond and now we're working in Madagascar and Argentina and all these amazing places.
And what does that, what is your methodology? You mentioned 100 sites, and at some cities it's maybe greater or smaller, but what is the consistent equipment you're using, or how are you capturing that data?
Yeah, like everyone at Lincoln Park Zoo, we're very concerned with animal welfare. So whenever we can, we try to use approaches that passively collect information on animals, meaning without bothering them, without being too invasive. So we use things like camera traps that take pictures of animals and a lot of acoustic devices that listen for animals. We want to understand their ecology, and it's best if we can do that without disrupting their behavior or changing what they're doing in any way. So even though we're working all across the city, we keep a very light touch in the way that we collect those data.
And when you're looking, you're searching more for biodiversity than abundance, right? Like who is where? Is that the goal?
Yeah, that's right. Our data really are perfectly optimized to answer just what you said, where animals live, not so much how many animals are there. And that's for a number of reasons. We want to understand how urbanization is changing the distribution of these species, as well as how things like climate change are doing that. And while it would be great to also know exactly how many animals are in a space, first of all, you only ever know that for one instant in time and then it changes. And secondly, there's just no good way to do that without capturing animals, which is, again, as I said, can run a risk of injuring those animals, which we always want to avoid.
And what is perhaps the most surprising thing you've seen in Chicago on these camera traps?
Having been doing this a while, we're seeing some big trends and some changes. And some of that is animals that I really thought were doing very well in the city that are starting to disappear. An example there are 2 species of foxes, both gray and red foxes, are in decline, which surprises me because many other cities around the U.S. have thriving populations of foxes. But then we have some on the other side where I never thought flying squirrels would be very common in the city, but suddenly they're everywhere. They've somehow unlocked some kind of cheat code into how to live in cities. I don't know what that cheat code is, and I want to find out. So it's fun to see some animals on the other side that are able to figure it out and really start to thrive in our city. So those are a few of the surprises.
I think many people I've seen on the internet or in my circles are surprised to see coyotes here. And when we've chatted, that's not a surprise at all to you. So can you tell me a little bit why not? Why that should be a naturally occurring species?
Yeah, coyotes have been in Chicago for a long time. People are seeing them more and more, and that could be because there are more of them here. It also could be because we're paying more attention. They're very elusive creatures. Even in the heart of our cities, they're good at avoiding us. But yeah, during COVID, I got a lot of calls from people who said, you'll never believe it. I saw a coyote downtown, and I had to explain that, well, they've been downtown. They've been downtown at least as long as I've been here, and probably 20 or 30 years. They're amazingly adaptable creatures. They live in New York City. They live in LA. We haven't really found any North American cities yet that are that are daunting to them. They're very good at it. But it's incredible to me how they can thrive while not really approaching people, while staying out of our way, while sort of functioning as these almost ghosts that are all around us. But if you're not looking very carefully, you'll probably never see them.
We also, speaking of the things that people spot and share on the internet, we have the Quiznos coyote and the Chunkosaurus turtle and we got Rathole here.
Mm-hmm.
How are those viral moments like working towards your mission or towards like your goal of people experiencing urban wildlife?
Yeah, the urban wildlife celebrities remind us how deeply people, even in cities, need to connect to nature, right? People attach to these stories because they're intrinsically fascinating to us. There's something about many of us that needs to be connected to nature. And so these animals, when they go viral, I think it just shows us how deep that connection is, but it can also teach us lessons. You mentioned the Quiznos coyote that happened in 2007, but then this year, roughly the same thing happened with an Aldi coyote, right? So this shows us that there's something that's causing some of these coyotes to walk into these big stores. Are they looking for food? Are they looking for shelter? What is causing them to do that? And when we see these patterns happening over and over, I think we can start to ask these questions about what does our city look like from the perspective of these other animals? And how can we maybe change that in a way to prevent these kinds of conflict encounters, like an animal walking into a heavily populated store, which you don't really want to see. And sometimes it's just silly, right? Chicago Rathole is just kind of a silly story. But people really got so engaged with it and so engaged in the debate of like what animal made that mark. And that's a great place for scientists to step in and say, okay, if we want to really have answers to some of these mysteries, these urban wildlife mysteries, well, that should be where science and institutions like Lincoln Park Zoo should be able to shed some light.
And for the record,
it was a squirrel. I'm really sorry. People got really angry with me on social media when I said it was a squirrel, but recently some other researchers, I think, pretty definitively proved it was a squirrel. All I can say is that, I apologize that you're disappointed. I don't apologize for stating the facts as they are. It's squirrel. We could still call it the Chicago Rathole, I suppose, but definitely.
You mentioned conflict with humans, and that is consistent anywhere there's wildlife, right? So how are you seeing that? You mentioned field sites in Madagascar and all these places. What is conflict looking like globally?
Yeah, the nature of those conflicts differs a little bit when you have different species in different spaces. But I think one of the great universal things about urban wildlife is everyone has a crazy story. I bet you have an amazing, crazy urban wildlife story. If you thought about it for a second, maybe you can tell us what that is. But yeah, so the players are different because you may be talking about a different animal. In California, it might be a mountain lion, right? There's a lot of urban mountain lion stories. Where I grew up in Colorado, I worked on prairie dogs, and I had my share of crazy urban prairie dog stories. But everyone, I think, that has walked around in a city at some point has been surprised by something. And I see these moments happen often. I'm walking around, and sometimes when I'll see a coyote, someone will come next to me and go, oh, that must be someone's dog. And I get to explain, like, that's a wild animal. That's a coyote. And you can just see that it changes their perception of the city a little bit. It's kind of like, oh, I didn't know that could happen here. And that can be a really positive thing. It can provide this sense of wonder and this, all of the awe that nature can give us when we go out to a national forest or we watch, Animal Planet. All of that can happen all around us. And I think when people realize that, it really can open your eyes to a lot of things about what we can do in cities and what we should do to protect nature in our cities.
On the other end of the scale, we have gotten many calls that our wolves have escaped, and then it ends up just being a coyote that's, a scraggly little 30 pounds. That's not a wolf. So, both ends of the scale there. Conflict also can be, human wildlife conflict, but in these urbanizing cities, it can also be the way we build our skyscrapers, the way we use lights, and like the way light pollution impacts birds and bats and all the things. Can you talk about some of those things that are consistent across cities, whether you're Chicago or New York or maybe something much smaller? You're still going to have light pollution, for example.
Yeah, from the very beginning of the Institute, we wanted to do the kind of work that was really going to make a difference for people and animals in cities. We didn't just want to learn about animals in cities, but find ways to coexist with them. And it took us many years before we decided we really had the base of data behind us to start to address those questions. But that's part of why we expanded beyond Chicago, because when we started talking to planners and architects and developers, they said, we don't just need information that might be relevant in one city. We need a playbook that's going to function no matter where we go about how to reduce these conflicts. And by now creating this massive network of cities, we're able to do that, and we're able to create best practices that work no matter where you are. And some of those are things you might expect, right? Things like roads are a hazard for animals that can't fly pretty much anywhere. And so creating things like crossings, signage, funnel fencing into where safe crossings can happen. Those are sort of universal things that could work. Green roofs are a habitat for things that can fly in a lot of different places, right? But then in some cases, there are things that are going to be a little more specific, like what's the role of water in your city? Are you in a dry place or are you in a wet place? What is climate change going to do to your city based on where you are? So it's been really exciting now that we have all these data from all over the world that we can start to understand what are the universal things we can point to and what are the things that need to be local.
Interesting. Thank you for teeing me up. Speaking of local policies, we have also created the Chicago Wildlife Management Plan, Coexistence Plan. What does that look like working with the city of Chicago, and what was the transition? Like what was before and what is it now?
Yeah, so the city approached us to write this new wildlife management and coexistence plan. And I think right there in the name, you sort of get a sense of how it has shifted. It was really, I think, originally drafted as a management plan. This notion of like, okay, if animals are doing something that bothers us, what do we do about it? How do we make it stop? Adding the coexistence part lets us interrogate sort of when is a conflict really a conflict? Because I think a lot of people 10 or 20 years ago, if they saw a coyote on their street, they were thinking of that as a conflict. And now we're understanding that's not a conflict at all. They belong here. They're doing fine. A coyote, in your house, that's a conflict. But on your street, that's not a conflict. So when we drafted that, we were both using our best state-of-the-art science to make recommendations, but we were trying to philosophically nudge the city and its residents towards this notion of maybe really think about when it is a conflict and when it could be actually something pretty cool. Just seeing an unusual animal on your street, seeing it go about its daily life, that really can enrich people's lives. And we know from our research and research from many others that exposure to nature actually can be really positive for people's both physical and mental health. So it was really fun to write this piece of policy that we hope in a sort of a general way, but an important way, even if it's a little bit subtle, nudges our way of thinking about animals as something that belong here.
You mentioned like experiencing wildlife in your neighborhood and in your backyard. What about that in urban wildlife in general? You've sort of touched on it in various ways, and hoping you can kind of say it more succinctly than I can. But like, why urban wildlife?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of exactly how succinct I want to be because I have a long version of this. People ask me all the time, what is a zoo doing studying urban wildlife? We're still the only zoo that does this in a big way, although a number of zoos are starting to follow our lead a little bit, which is great. There are three main reasons that we study urban wildlife. We've touched on most of them. They all start with C. That makes it nice to got to remember. So the first is coexistence. That has to do with reducing conflict, thinking about how animals interact with us in our landscape and changing that in a way that will help us to live with them. The second is connection. We are a zoo. We connect people in nature. That's what we do. And we've been working really closely with our learning department to try to start that conversation about why biodiversity matters, where people live. And we know that most people on our planet today live in cities. So beginning that conversation about the importance of biodiversity by saying, hey, just look out your door. Just look around where you live and work. There's animals there. Let's think about them and their lives. I think that's really powerful. And the third is conservation. Right. Again, we live on a planet that's urbanizing. We also live on a planet where we're losing our biodiversity crisis. Right. We're losing animals every single day. And we believe, myself and my colleagues believe, that the only way maybe to start to win that battle is to think differently about our cities. Not to just think of them as something that harms biodiversity, but something that really can help it if we build our cities a little differently, if we allow animals a seat at the table when we talk about how cities are built. Well, I don't know how succinct that was.
I think that was great. 3C. I like it. I can remember that. Yeah. We've also talked about different, you mentioned the city and the various spaces. And there are also so many green spaces that people maybe don't think of. Cemeteries, green spaces, parks we maybe naturally think of, but golf courses, all of these things. And to your point about seeing things holistically, you've also mentioned to me previously about like underrepresented neighborhoods also are often underrepresented in science. Right. And there are some incredible migratory pathways and things here. Can you share more about like biodiversity in Chicago and what that looks like and how you're trying to sort of myth bust there a little bit?
Yeah, Chicago's an incredible city for biodiversity. We have a lot of green space. You've touched on that both through the forest preserve districts, our park districts, cemeteries, golf courses, but it's not equitably distributed, right? So some neighborhoods have a lot more access to that than others. Our study design is set up specifically to try to ensure that we have a representative sample of all different types of neighborhoods across Chicago. And that's really important because there are a lot of apps and things like iNaturalist and eBird that people are using to detect wildlife. And scientists will go to that and they'll say, oh gosh, hey, look, all the cool birds look like they live in the wealthy white neighborhoods. Well, it's actually just the fact that the wealthy white people are the ones who have the time and the energy to go out and count birds, right? So we're really trying to fight against this potential feedback loop that's happening with those data. So not just us, but all of our partners across our network, we're sampling across the entire city so we can get a sense of what nature is really out there, who has access to it, and how we can make recommendations to make that more equitable because nature is so important for people.
And there also are other types of urban wildlife that are perhaps less pleasant.
Sure.
I will perhaps do a whole other episode with Maureen who can talk all about rats, but can you give just like a brief synopsis of how things like rats are urban wildlife and how we're managing that or researching that?
Yeah, it's surprising. Rats are undoubtedly the most successful urban mammal in history, right? We have no real records of cities without rats. They've been urban as long as cities have existed. And yet, if you look into the scientific literature on urban rats, there's not as much as you'd think. They're kind of understudied, especially considering how prevalent they are. And it kind of makes sense if you think about they're icky, right? They're not that fun to study. Nobody really comes out of grad school and they're like, all right, rats, that's my thing. But because our mission is to help connect people with nature, including reducing conflicts, we have really taken on this challenge. And so we host a project called the Chicago Rat Project that is looking at specifically that. Where are there rats in our city? Where are they distributed? It is not equitable. Why is that? What causes these rat infestations? And what's the impact on people? And we know that those impacts are really quite significant. The pest control company Orkin, until this year, every year they've come out and said Chicago is the rattiest city in the U.S. Don't actually think that's true. But we do have a lot of rats. And so yeah, we're really trying to get at that. And then we don't just do that from an ecology standpoint or a science standpoint. We're working with public health experts, including hospital systems and other large places, to really understand what's the intersection between rats and how they influence environmental health, human health, the health of other biodiversity. When people put out rat poison for rats, they're killing a lot of other animals. What alternatives are there? So again, it's kind of gross. A lot of people don't like talking about rats. It kind of squicks them out, but it's very important to try to understand how we can reduce conflicts with this species.
I think something you mentioned, rats are perhaps one of the, maybe because they're the most successful, a great example of the intersection of all those things. And you think of rats have lepto and that can get your dogs and it's in the human health system and are you vaccinated, all these different things. And so I think, yeah, they might be icky, but they are such an important piece of the puzzle. So it's nice that we're digging into that.
Yeah, ecology is the study of how things fit together. And myself and my staff were ecologists. You can't understand how a system works and how it all fits together if you only focus on the bright and shiny and pretty parts, right? Some of these parts, like rats, which don't belong here, right? They're not native to this system at all, but they're having an enormous impact. And so it's really critical to understand that impact and how we can reduce it. And so, yeah, we've been very fortunate to be able to do that. And zoos, I think, are specifically positioned to be really good at this research that brings together human health, wildlife health, environmental health in this field that we call One Health because of not just our scientists like myself and my team, but our veterinary staff like Dr. Catherine and others who really bring that expertise together. So I think that's where we can have an impact. So we're rolling up our sleeves and getting to it.
You've mentioned climate change a couple of times. And how does the seasonality of Chicago impact urban wildlife? And what do you see sort of happening in the next 5, 10, 20, 50 years?
Yeah, absolutely. We're very fortunate in our team that we collect data in all 4 seasons of the year. And a lot of our colleagues who work at universities, they can't do that. They can only collect data in the summer because they have to teach. So we're out there collecting all these data on seasons. As climate change happens, we're seeing milder and milder winters. That can create a lot of problems for us because some of our species that create problems for people, including both non-natives like rats, but also some of our native species like rabbits, we expect them to have these large population declines in the winter. When that doesn't happen, their populations just grow and grow and grow because they don't really have predators that keep them in check. That could be a big problem. We're also seeing species that have never lived here. They're stretching out their range, growing further and further north as it gets warmer. The one I keep warning people about is armadillos. They're in central Illinois now. They will be here within my lifetime. I think we'll see them in the city. It's going to be a very strange sight. And then, as you mentioned, with migratory birds, we're seeing different species, but also a number of species that just don't migrate anymore, right? Like Canada geese, which traditionally would have migrated out in the winter, don't do that anymore. They're here. So climate change has to change the way we think about a lot of our human-wildlife interactions, and those impacts are going to become more and more intense. And so I think it's all the more important that we start to look at our cities from an ecological standpoint to try to understand how are these relationships going to shift and how is that going to change the way we interface with nature.
For people who are living on this planet, what are some things, especially in an urban environment where maybe you have less personal space that you own or rent, what are some actions people can take to live wildlife friendly or reduce conflicts?
Yeah, the number one thing I think that everyone can work on is think about how your trash is stored. Again, it's not a glamorous topic, but with rats, we know that this unsecured trash is the most critical thing that will cause their populations to increase. So look at your dumpster, look at your trash can, make sure it's intact. If it's not, call your local municipality or whoever's in charge of that and get that taken care of. There are things you can do often, even if you have a little bit of space. I've had a lot of people tell me, even just people in apartments who have like those window planters outside their windows, that things like flying squirrels are making use of them. Pollinators like butterflies are making use of them if you have a rooftop garden. And also, even if you don't have any land, there might be a community garden in your community that you can be a part of. That's something we work on a lot. We have a research project looking at community gardens, how they connect people to nature, and how we can reduce infestations of things like rats in those gardens. So if you look around your community, there are probably ways for you to connect, even if you just rent an apartment or something like that. And you can always volunteer with your local park district, forest preserve district, or with the zoo if you have other ways that you want to get connected with nature.
Building wildlife spaces makes me also think of Nature Boardwalk and how that has transformed from a man-made pond to a true like prairie ecosystem. And urban wildlife had a big role in that progression. What does that look like, and what have you seen over the last 10 years of that transition?
Yeah, it's insane to me to think that when I arrived at the zoo, Nature Boardwalk was a big dirt pit. They had drained it from the south pond that it was, and they were preparing it to be the beautiful Nature Boardwalk that we know. But at the time, it was just this giant wasteland. And I just thought to myself, oh, is the community ever going to rally around this? And initially, they really didn't. They were so used to the way it had been that I think there was a little resistance. But now it's incredible to see what a unique space it is and how many people visit it and are just amazed that they can see turtles, that they can see birds, they can see fish. They can just walking around in the heart of the city see all of these amazing things. It's a huge part of our research platform because when we develop new ways to study wildlife, we can test them out in our backyard before we deploy them more widely. We've done this, for example, with different ways that we use camera traps to study small mammals and snakes and things like that. So that's been very exciting. We can train our interns in how to do wildlife handling safely in a local space where we sort of control the different variables that we need to control. And it's just really inspiring for my team and I it's just this emblem of what we want to do, right? It's this nature space in the heart of the city, relatively low conflict, people and wildlife coming together. That's what we want to achieve around the world. And it's not all going to look like Nature Boardwalk, but from a philosophical standpoint, that's where it all started. And that's really the heart of the work that we do.
Another species that comes to mind are the black-crowned night herons, which a wild colony nests here every year, hundreds and hundreds of birds. And we didn't necessarily create a space for them intentionally. It just sort of happened. Why is that significant?
Well, black-crowned night herons are a state endangered species. They're not rare globally, but they're quite rare in the state of Illinois. And our colony is the largest colony by far that's left in our state. So you could phrase it as they're making their last stand here at the zoo. And it's incredible to me and to many people in the ornithological community that this is where they've decided to do it. But it happened just as we were opening the boardwalk, right? So there is this space for them where they can fish, where they can do things that's really quite suitable. To me, it's a very exciting story because a lot of people think, well, in urban areas, maybe you can manage rats, maybe you can manage nuisance wildlife, but we can't do conservation. Conservation is not possible. But as I mentioned, that's one of our 3 seeds because I really believe for many species we can. And the black-crowned night herons are showing us, okay, we may be rare, but we like this space. And the fact that it's embedded in Chicago, that's not a deterrent to us. We're going to show up every single year and make the choice that this is the best spot there is. There are probably a lot of other species where we could do that. Piping plovers are maybe an example of another endangered species that's making a stand in Chicago. If we continue to create these beautiful nature spaces like Nature Boardwalk, we can achieve that. That's not only going to come with positive benefits, right? It's going to come with challenges, as our night herons have to our horticulture staff and our animal care staff. But I think it can be worth it because protecting these rare animals, I mean, that's why we're here, right? That's why we're working for a zoo. We really believe that we need to conserve this planet's amazing biodiversity. So the notion that we could do that in the heart of a huge city like Chicago, it just opens so many possibilities for what else we could do.
Thinking of the future of urban wildlife, what's next? Obviously maybe keep expanding, but what are different tactics or approaches you're taking?
Yeah, our tools keep getting better to study these animals, and that's exciting. So traditionally, we've collected most of our data on mammals using camera traps, but now we have acoustic devices that can listen for birds and bats, and we have machine learning tools that can go through those sound files and tell us what species are located where. That's incredibly exciting to see that move forward. We're also continuing to expand how many partnerships that we have around the world, right? So I'm super excited that I hope in 5 or 10 years we'll have data from Asia, from Australia, from parts of the world that are also rapidly urbanizing, but where the species are very different. And I think that'll be very exciting. And we'll start to make comparisons. We won't be able to compare species because mostly we don't have the same species, but we'll be able to compare things like conflict rates and movement of animals and how often different taxonomic groups are maybe being successful in moving into cities. And that's going to be very exciting to, for the first time, be able to say, oh, we have a truly global data set. We can understand as a phenomenon on our planet what's going on with urban wildlife. Why do they live where they live? And how can we find ways to better live with them?
You mentioned activity patterns and what the animals are up to. And also if you, for viewers, want to go to chicagowildlifewatch.org, you can help identify some of these camera trap images. And in that, it asks what the animals are up to. Why is their behavior important?
Well, the behavior of animals is ultimately what causes them to either coexist with or come into conflict with us, right? If you think about it, animal behavior drives where they live, what they eat, when they're crossing roads, all of the things that they're doing. So a lot of it comes down to behavior. And we're trying to understand that in a number of ways, both by looking at information from our equipment, our camera traps, our acoustic monitors and things like that. But also in some cases by talking to the public and getting the public to help us to understand where these animals are and what they're doing, because my team can't be everywhere at once. So you mentioned Chicago Wildlife Watch. That's a great platform that people can go to. Another program we have is called Bat Tracker. This is a program where we work with communities in Chicago to walk around their neighborhoods at dusk and detect bats with us using specialized equipment. It kind of looks like a Ghostbuster backpack, so it's pretty fun. So yeah, if people want to get involved, one of the great things about urban wildlife, right, is they're here. They're in your backyard. So there are ways to get involved that are much easier than if you're interested in lions and you have to get out to Africa or something like that.
Seth, as someone who has a very distinct role at Lincoln Park Zoo, I think all of us here at the zoo, when people think of the zoo, they think either zookeeper or just the one thing they remember about you is, oh, that's the zoo guy, right? Mm-hmm. So who are you outside of Lincoln Park Zoo? What are your hobbies? What are your interests? Yeah. What takes up your brain space?
Yeah, that's a great question. I love to jog. I run quite a bit every year. I love to run the race for the zoo. Run for the zoo. Why did I say race? Let's do that again. I love to jog. I love to run every year. I do the run for the zoo, which is so exciting, and I do a number of other races. But I think also I'm an enormous nerd, so I'm involved in a lot of board games, card games. I actually run a Dungeons & Dragons club at the zoo with other zoo employees where we play at lunch, which is quite a bit of fun. Yeah, the zoo, well, it's one of our core values, right? Nerdiness. So there's a fair number. And then if you look around my office, if you could, one of the things you'll see is that my office is stuffed with Legos because I love building Legos, and my wife has banished them all from our house because we have no more space. So she said, those Legos can live at work with you. So that gives you a little bit of an insight into my very dorky life.
I like it. Do you have a favorite? I see the Shire. I see...
Yeah, this is my Dungeons & Dragons Lego set, combining those two aspects of my life in one. And yeah, we've got the Shire. I have some Lord of the Rings sets here, including that one. I do sometimes do nature ones. This is a kingfisher. I mean, yeah,
bring that one over.
Oh, it's beautiful. This is a lovely Lego kingfisher. I love Lego does a lot of nature-based stuff these days with plants and animals, which I love to see. Yeah, he's got a little fish in his mouth, which is pretty cute. So yeah, it's a fun activity for me. Just sometimes when I'm stressed, just pretending I'm 10 and sticking plastic blocks together. It's a lot of fun.
I love it. I mean, it's funny though too. It's like you're turning your brain off work, but there's wildlife, there's science, there's architecture.
Yeah, I sort of like it because at the end of the process, you have a thing and you can put it somewhere, do something decorative with it. But as opposed to like watching TV where you don't really have anything at the end of it, at least you got something.
Yeah, but incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your office and your time with us today.
Thank you so much.
Anything else?
I mean, I have a very strange job, but I have the best job, I think, on the planet. I'm able to study urban wildlife, which is what I've always wanted to do, and I can do it in this amazing zoo setting where I can work with incredible scientists, educators, folks like you that connect our work to the public. So I just feel incredibly fortunate to come to work every day.
Great. Well, can't beat that. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.